Suspicious bank transactions on the accounts of Vice President Sara Duterte and her husband, Manases Carpio, were flagged by the Anti-Money Laundering Council during the continuation of the impeachment proceedings at the House of Representatives. Good morning. I'm Attorney Karen Jimeno, and this is At the Forefront. Former Senator Antonio Trillanes alleges Vice President Sara Duterte and other members of her family received millions of pesos from suspected drug lord Sammy. Trillanes testified during Wednesday's House Justice Committee hearing, which tackled the impeachment complaint against the Vice President. Anti-Money Laundering Council Executive Director Ronel Buenaventura, for his part, said 18 of the transactions cited in the affidavit of Trillanes match their own records. Can these allegations be considered impeachable offenses committed by the Vice President? To answer this and other questions, we'll be speaking to Attorney Jose Roy. He's the former Dean of the Law School at the Pamantasan ng Lungsod ng Maynila. He was also a defense counsel during the impeachment proceedings of the late Chief Justice Renato Corona. Good morning, Dean Judd.
Hi, Karen. Good morning. Good to see you.
Good to see you, and I know it's your birthday, so thank you for granting this interview despite your birthday.
Thank you for having me. This is long overdue. I think the first invitation I got from you was more than a year ago. I'm just so happy to be here and to see you. Good morning to everyone who's watching.
We're gonna have you in the studio one of these days. Lagi kayo out of that. Yes. Okay, so let's start with the impeachment proceedings.
Sure.
In the House Justice Committee. During yesterday's proceedings, the Anti-Money Laundering Council said banks flagged 33 suspicious transactions and 630 covered dealings. So these are, diba, meron tayong covered transactions that fall under the law. And they said that this is worth 6.7 billion pesos involving Vice President Duterte and her husband, Manases Carpio. And about 4.4 billion pesos flowed into the accounts. 1.5 billion were transferred out, and around 791 million could not be classified as an inflow or outflow. So with all of these, can we already say that this can be considered as ill-gotten wealth? Kasi impeachment yung pinag-uusapan.
Karen, I think the first thing we have to bear in mind is that while these appear to be criminal acts, the impeachment proceeding itself is not a criminal act. It is an administrative proceeding. It does not involve, the impeachment proceeding itself does not involve incarceration or jail time. Okay? So the standard of evidence is a little different. Now, with respect to the reach of the AMLAC, certainly in instances where money laundering is involved or predicate offenses for other crimes, I'm sure the AMLAC would have sufficient jurisdiction to look into those accounts or at least to record them. And that can become the basis of a more extensive inquiry.
So this would require an extensive inquiry because I remember during the time of Chief Justice Renato Corona's impeachment proceedings, and you and I were there when we were at the Senate, sitting as an impeachment court at that time, when then Ombudsman Chit Morales also testified and produced Anti-Money Laundering Council records and showed supposed inflows and outflows of money into the account of Chief Justice Renato Corona. And I think at the time it was one of the most explosive testimonies during the impeachment trial. But in the end, years later, there were no cases that prevailed against Chief Justice Corona. The Sandigan Bayan cases were also dismissed. So how should we treat reports like this that come out when it comes to inflows of money?
Karen, before I proceed, I've been very careful talking about the Corona impeachment and comparing it to the proceedings going on today. You remember, Corona did not have the benefit of a preliminary hearing as we're having now. It was sent straight into the Senate. The second thing I want to point out is I don't want it to sound like I want to relitigate those issues. what is past is past. What is history. But in an impeachment proceeding, and I think many of the congressmen have made this clear, because because accountability is the central issue. It calls for a laying of the cards, laying everything bare to be seen, and the judgment can be rendered there. Remember, as I said, this is not strictly speaking an issue for searching of crimes, but for impropriety, whether or not the conduct is fitting or befitting one who holds public office. You're right. Justice Carpio Morales came forward with their records. And it turned out that those multiple transactions were really money placements of Mr. Corona. Apparently, the practice of banks is to create several accounts. So I think there was a report that he had 87 bank accounts. But these were just interest movements. Every time interest is drawn from his placement, a new account is created. And then it's transferred and so forth and so on. And that's why it multiplied. But from the depositor's point of view, he only had one placement, which he would roll every 90 days or 30 days, I don't recall anymore. But every time that happens, internally, a new account would be created. And that's why it created that image that there were so many transactions. You were correct. In the end, there was no offense charged against him for those bank accounts. Now, the source of the money was a different issue. And again, no, if you will recall, one of the key factors or one of the key issues with respect to the bank accounts of the former the late Chief Justice, I should say, was that some of the funds from the estate of Mrs. Corona were kept in his name. You remember?
Yeah.
And it created some confusion as to where did this money come from and so forth and so on.
So I guess to your point, Tama, you can't compare the situation then and now because you're comparing apples and oranges. We don't know the details.
Actually, Karen, there is some room for comparison, no? Because in this case, I think even the bank accounts of Attorney Carpio, the spouse of VP Sara, there's also a request to inquire into them. You know very well that if there is no separation of property, then the funds of each member, each partner in the conjugal partnership are communally owned until they're separated later on. So that is complicated because there are obligations now in relation to the preparation of the SALN. That's right. They might have been earned by Attorney Carpio, but because of the system of our laws, VP Sara has an interest in that property. The question is it a legal obligation to report the conjugal funds? That's not clear from the SALN form.
So how should the defense respond to this? They're not appearing in the House Justice Committee hearings. At what point should the clarifications be made?
This is the time, Karen. You remember, as I was saying, Mr. Corona did not have the benefit of an opportunity to rebut the claims right at the first moment. We went straight into trial. So in a sense, really, VP Sara is quite fortunate because you can raise the defenses now and show that these are not properly the subject of an impeachment complaint or they do not constitute any kind of offense that should be considered in the impeachment against her. That is something that is being bitterly fought by the defense. Yet, at the same time, as a litigator, no, it is an opportunity also to destroy the evidence if, in fact, it has no bearing. Of course, it's truly inconvenient if you had to lay down all your defenses and all that, but that is how our system works. As I said, this is a unique opportunity because it's unfortunate that the term mini trial came up. I don't see that as what is happening. This is really just an inquisitorial examination of the evidence and the allegations, and whether or not we should really entangle the Senate in this process. It's a good opportunity for the defense to pare down and to limit whatever should be or can be brought to trial.
Dean Judd, the Anti-Money Laundering Council also noted a spike in the historical trend of Duterte's bank transactions, which surged to 208.1 million pesos in 2007. The volume further intensified between 2009 and 2013,
Right.
with annual totals averaging around 400 million pesos. Can this be considered an impeachable offense, even if the dates, as you can see, 2007, 2009, 2013, the dates do not pertain to the term of Sara Duterte as Vice President?
Correct, Karen, and that's a secondary threshold issue that would have to be addressed. No? But you know as well that we have what we call a proof of pattern, okay? And the prosecution has every right to insist, oh, this is the pattern of behavior. In other words, ito talaga yung ginagawa niyan, paunti-unti, iniipon or kumikita or whatever it is. Well, of course, the defense has to disprove that. Say, no, just because I'm making money doesn't mean I'm stealing, etc., and so on. No? But the proof of pattern is a legitimate theory or a legitimate principle in evidence law. If there is a repeated conduct. That's why even the AMLAC has what you call suspicious transactions. It's not necessarily a value threshold, but because the pattern of the transactions might invite some doubt or invite some suspicion. So on the theory of proof of pattern, there might be some ground for the prosecution to argue that we can proceed to examine this. This pattern of growth in income will also show, no? What kind of income generation or income creation the individual has.
So not necessarily out of the scope of the House
Not
Justice Committee
necessarily.
hearings just because the dates do not pertain to her term
Yes.
as Vice President.
Yes.
Okay.
Now, remember, this is also what we call a recurring official. They run and they get elected. They sit out certain terms or they lose, but they come back. So that is also a continuing pattern, no? And while you're not necessarily trying them, hindi natin nililitis yung nangyari sa 2007, pero sinasabi natin, pag pinuna mo, pare-pareho, tuloy-tuloy. So yun ang pwedeng sabihin ng prosecution. They can make that case.
Okay.
And the evidence could be allowed or should be allowed.
And the Anti-Money Laundering Council also produced two sets of documents. One is a report on covered transactions involving Vice President Sara and her husband, and another on suspicious transactions from 2006 to 2025. So kung meron silang mga flinag back then na suspicious transactions, shouldn't complaints have already been filed years ago, back then? But before you answer this question, Dean Judge, we'll just have to take a short break. At the Forefront, we'll be right back. Welcome back at the Forefront. We continue our conversation with Attorney Jose Jodroy. He's the former Dean of Law School at the Pamantasan ng Lungsod ng Maynila. Dean Judd, the Anti-Money Laundering Council furnished the Justice Committee with two sets of documents. One, a report on covered transactions involving Vice President Sara and her husband, and another on suspicious transactions from 2006 to 2025. If suspicious transactions were flagged years ago, shouldn't complaints have already been filed against Sara Duterte back then, even before she was Vice President?
You know, Karen, the matter about when to file a complaint also has to be taken into the perspective of prescription of the offenses. A suspicious transaction, as explained by the executive director yesterday, does not involve a specific amount. It actually emanates from an observation of the bank itself, of the bank officials themselves. When they notice some kind of irregularity or some kind of pattern that is unusual, okay, that makes it suspicious. It doesn't necessarily mean that it's criminal, illicit, or illegal. It's just unusual or suspicious. It might be a small amount. It might be a recurring, regular amount that comes from an unknown source. So that makes it suspicious. But it might not even involve a large amount. Now, the filing of a complaint over suspicious transaction, that would be more like a shooting in the dark, because there's really no basis to say that the transaction itself or the pattern or the series of transactions themselves constitute or indicate the commission of the crime. However, if the suspicious transaction or the nature of the transactions or their pattern or their irregularity or whatnot also involve covert transactions, then that might be a different case.
Covered transactions, usually these are the amounts, right? Like if they
Yes, larger
exceed
amounts is 500.
500,000 pesos or more. Oo.
Correct.
Yeah. And I get what you're saying kasi, like, for example, just as an analogy, kunwari, merong ikaw namatay na kamag-anak na matagal mo nang hindi nakita from abroad, biglang nag-deposit ng share mo from the settlement of the estate na,
Yes.
let's say,
Yes.
$500,000 biglang pumasok sa account mo, it can be flagged as a suspicious transaction in the bank, right?
Covered.
Kasi walang visible means na pinanggalingan sa steady income mo dito, bigla na lang may pumasok sa account mo na ganung amount. So that can
ganun
be a
kalaki,
suspicious transaction, oo.
Pag ganun kalaki, Karen, that would be a
Covered transaction and a suspicious transaction as well, right? Where those two
Yes.
converge, but it doesn't necessarily link to an illicit activity or an illegal activity.
What I'm saying, Karen, if for instance, you had a savings account for a child, let's say, even a child, a minor, no? May savings account, di ba? Then all of a sudden, it receives $2,000 from different parts of the world every now and then. Yung pala, like you said, may minana. But the inheritance itself is not communicated to the bank. The bank just sees the money come in and the money go out or whatever. It just sees the movement of the money. So it would be unreasonable to demand that the authorities must file a case right away.
But it will indeed be flagged, right, as a
Yes,
suspicious
it's suspicious.
transaction.
Why before this account only had a 50 peso deposit every month, all of a sudden it's receiving thousands of dollars out of nowhere and it's being withdrawn for whatever reason, right? That might be suspicious, but that doesn't necessarily give rise to an obligation or a duty to bring the case right away. Now, we talked about the distinction between covered and suspicious transactions. Now, and this has happened many times, no? What they do is, let's say they want to move the money across an account. They'll remit 499,999. It falls under the covered transaction rule. See, or they'll stagger the amount so that you don't hit the 500,000 mark. No, these are some of the ways that that covered transaction is circumvented, and that may lead to may invite a suspicion of a suspected transaction, a suspicious transaction rather.
Okay, so yesterday, one of the notable characters that appeared in the House Justice Committee hearings would be former Senator Antonio Trillanes. And he testified before the House panel on alleged bank accounts of former President Rodrigo Duterte and Vice President Sara, along with 4 of their family members, are receiving about 181 million pesos in total from Davao City-based businessman Samuel or Sammy Uy, whom he accused of being a drug lord. There has been no conviction of Sammy Uy in any drug trafficking case. So, one, is it appropriate for Trillanes to label Sammy Uy as a drug lord during the House Justice Committee hearings? And what would be the implication of amounts being transferred from this individual? So, hindi siya government funds. It comes from an individual. It's not like other situations where they relate to kickbacks from government projects or allegations of government funds being transferred. But would that constitute an impeachable offense?
Well, whether or not it constitutes an impeachable offense would have to be the result of a proper trial. Now, the right of or the right of former Senator Trillanes to make those accusations, as a citizen, he's free to do that. Then it becomes a question of evidence. But let's put it this way, Karen. If they're in public office and they're routinely receiving funds from a private person, would that not be at least a suspicious transaction? Wouldn't it invite questions as why are you receiving funds from a private citizen? Unless there's a showing that you have a legitimate business transaction or some property was sold or something like that. So I think that's where Senator Trillanes is coming from. And certainly, if indeed it is verified that these funds were transferred from a private citizen to a public official and his immediate family, that's an area for concern. Don't you think that you would expect the public official himself to avoid any kind of suspicion, to let the funds that are being delivered to him or her be put in the accounts of close relatives or closer trusted persons? And so this might invite that suspicion, even if it assuming that it did not come up to 500,000 per transaction. The nature of the parties alone and the circumstances would create that suspicion. And because one, in this case, one might be a public official, that might be sufficient ground to proceed.
Okay.
Criminal
So to your
charge,
point,
yes.
this is also the time for the defense to address these
Yes.
allegations sa finding pa lang ng probable cause
Yes.
hearing. Okay.
That is my opinion, no, as a litigator. In fact, going back, if Mr. Corona had that opportunity, I would have told, let's go to that hearing and let's rebut and refute everything right there before it is brought to the Senate, so that by the time we get to the Senate, this has already been qualified. We can knock it out already.
Yeah. And Dean Judd, last question. Sayang, ang bilis ng time, no? So, dun sa issue ng SALN, Congressman Paulo Marcoleta raised the issue that the SALNs were not attached to the impeachment complaints. And he contended that the fact that the House Justice Committee had to subpoena the SALNs was proof that this was a fishing expedition. So, tayo kasi din, naging issue rin yung SALN nung time ng impeachment proceeding ni Chief Justice Corona. So, kailan ba dapat pinoproduce itong SALN if it is at issue in the impeachment?
Okay, Karen, I don't want to be accused of telling the lawyers what to do, but let me say one thing. I think Congressman Chu explained, he cited the rules, and the rules clearly allow them to issue subpoena to support the allegations in the complaint, no? Now, the other thing that struck me is that the SALNs are supposed to be public documents. Haven't we been arguing about this all these years? They're never accessible. Well, this is the proper time to make them accessible, and this is a legitimate purpose because it is an impeachment proceeding. It's an exception to the bank secrecy and all of that. And the committee does have subpoena powers. Now, if you're going to say you cannot subpoena that, you cannot verify the allegations, then what are we here for?
Yeah, but
What are
the
we
question
having
ko lang,
preliminary
Dean
hearing
Judd, and
for?
sorry, we're going into overtime, pero yung point mo, this is an exception under also dun sa impeachment, yung pagsubpoena ng SALN, pero yung bank secrecy law as well. But in the first place, paano nakakuha si former Senator Trillanes nung bank documents? Wasn't this a violation of the bank secrecy law? Kasi at that time, he was already talking about these bank accounts, but this was before the impeachment proceedings started.
Remember, Karen, Chief Justice Corona, we had that same dilemma.
Ayan, may small lady na nag-abot ng documents with
Yes, there was this little
Congressman Ray
lady,
Umali, and then meron din supposedly
Ah,
nag-iwan ng
but-
documents sa gate ni Congressman Boyet
Correct.
Banal. Oo.
But remember also that the Supreme Court did issue an injunction against the production of certain bank accounts, but that was confined to foreign exchange currency. Okay. Now, with respect to the production of the SALNs, my personal belief is, when you join public office, lay it bare. You should post it every year proudly. Oh, this is what I make, this is what I'm worth. Matagal na akong mayaman or hanggang ngayon mahirap pa ako, whatever it is. Kung tinatago mo yan, maghanap ka na lang ng ibang trabaho. Because this is a public trust. Now, the other thing, Karen, and this now I'm maybe overstepping, no? You remember very well that the SALN law allows you to amend your SALN Maari ka naman kasing nagkamali eh. And it's understandable. Pag matagal ka nang nag-iipon ng mga ari-arian and whatnot, minsan nakakaligtaan mo, minsan na-omit mo. Minsan nga, there are people na mahilig sa maraming bank accounts eh. After a while, they forget, meron pala silang bank account dito, bank account dun, etc. and so on. So the amendment of the SALN was not permitted during the time of Corona. Remember?
Yeah.
I don't know if they want to test that again or if there is even a need, to amend the SALN. But with respect to your question about Congressman Marcoleta's objection, I understand that they want to fiercely fight against this. But on the other hand, there is much to be gained by confronting the issue right off the bat. That is a matter of public record yung SALN eh.
Yeah.
And again, like I said, ang tagal-tagal na natin pinag-aawayan yung access to the SALN na yan. Why don't we just open it up? I don't care what position you hold.
Yeah.
If you're in public office, wear it on your sleeve proudly. Oy, matagal na ako mayaman. Oy, hanggang ngayon mahirap pa ako. Whatever it is, di ba?
Okay, Dean John, sorry, I have to cut you off kasi kulang na tayo sa time. But this is a reason why you should come back here again. So we'll have you guest again in the future.
No, Karen, anytime, let me know. And hopefully I won't be out of town next time.
Yes, thank you and happy birthday again.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. First, it was Ramil Madriaga. Now it's former Senator Antonio Trillanes who made explosive allegations against the Vice President and other members of her family. The House Justice Committee plans to hold a final hearing on April 29 as it moves to determine probable cause on the impeachment complaints against her. Will there be more accusations against the Vice President? And will she survive this political tempest being hurled against her? Be informed, be insightful of the news. I'm Attorney Karen Jimeno. Always stay at the forefront.